your opinion, should prisons be run privately or by the government?
And there are benefits to both. I mean, if you have private owner or private management, I guess, of prisons, then it would take the financial burden out of the taxpayers, and you could obviously use that money for education or other initiatives sponsored by the government. But if the government is in charge of it, they don't have to be beholden to anybody in terms of what their policies are or answer to anybody. So there are benefits to both.
Good. All right. And talking about the benefits again, do the benefits of federally owned prisons outweigh those of a private prison, do you think?
I would say yes, and the reason for that is if you have federally owned prisons as opposed to privately owned, then you have the U.S. government as the main backer. And while we currently hear of all these problems with the U.S. government, from what I've read, it doesn't necessarily have the same kind of status on the state level. If you look at Governor Kitzhaber's State of the State address that he gave yesterday, he indicated that the state really is in financial difficulty, and he indicated privatization of state prisons is something that he would favor. The U.S. government, I don't think, is as in bad shape as the state government in terms of its finances. So I would say probably for federal prisons at least to maintain the way it currently is.
Okay, cool. All right. And what do you think are the benefits of tax dollars in government prisons versus private prisons? I don't know if that makes a lot of sense.
Private prisons. Again, it's a matter of control. I mean, if the government is funding it, then they decide who is going to be in that prison and who isn't. If it's privately funded, then depending on what the crime is, I don't know if they would be able to have some kind of influence that they might not have otherwise had if it were the government that were in charge of the funding.
All right, good. What do you think is the difference between government and privately run prisons? This can be on as little as like the upkeep of the prison, or as big as like the money trading part of it.
Okay.
The economics of it.
I think I know where you're going with that. With the government funding of the prisons, they certainly would be in more of a position to dictate, what is and is not there, what upgrades are needed, what upgrades aren't. Again, it's all about influence. I mean, if it's privately funded, then you're going to have outside influence from outside the government. And some people think that that's something positive. I don't want to imply that that's 100% negative. Maybe having some kind of third-party involvement in this that might actually make conditions that the prisoners have to live in better than what they currently are. Okay, it works both ways, but certainly I think it's about influence is the key here. Who is going to be in those prisons, who is not, what are they going to have access to, what their living conditions are going to be like. If it's privately funded, you're going to have outsiders putting their 2 cents in on those questions, whereas if it's 100% government funded, it's up to the elected officials to make that call.
All right. And do you think that more serious and violent offenses in federal prisons are more than there are in private prisons? Like, are there more violent offenses in federal prisons?
I'd have to look that up. I'm not sure what the statistics are in that category. I mean, from what I've heard, I mean, certainly, there is unfortunately violence in prisons. I don't know if there's any big difference, privately funded versus federally funded.
Okay. And the last question, do you think private prisons save more money than federal prisons do?
It would certainly save more money from the government,